Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Eclectic Leadership Movement podcast. Today, we are joined by Dr. Quresh Moochhala, a global academic, strategist, and the founder of Actionist Consulting, a dynamic firm based in Pune, in India that delivers practical, affordable solutions in branding, marketing, communications, and strategic planning. Dr. Moochhala's career spans continents, from Dubai and London to Mumbai and Sydney, and his credentials include a global director of business administration from Geneva, an MBA from London, and a BCom from Australia. His groundbreaking doctoral research was India's first in-depth study on Gen Z piracy in OTT platforms. Over the past 2 decades, he taught at leading institutions like Symbiosis, Lexicon Mile, and Sri Balaji University, and his award winning research has been celebrated by both academics and industry leaders. Through Actionist Consulting, he is on a mission to reshape how businesses view consulting, making it more accessible, action oriented, and impact driven. Dr. Quresh, welcome.
Thank you, Shehzaad.
Now, before we get on, I also want to share that I share two more identities with Dr. Quresh, whom I just called Quresh, because we met first in 2005 while doing our MBA here in London. So it's been actually 20 years that I haven't met you, Quresh, but it's been a long time, but it seemed just yesterday. So that is our main connection. And the third one that I really wanted to share with the viewers is that Quresh is leading the expansion of our eclectic leadership movement in India and in the Middle East. So we have more than one connections going on. But today, he is Dr. Quresh Moochhala. He's going to talk to us about his journey to where he is today, his view and perspectives of leadership. So we can't wait to hear more from you, Dr. Quresh, today.
Right. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. And yes, let's begin.
Fantastic. So let's start with where we are, Quresh, today. The very basic question, and you have been dealing with many leaders. You're a teacher yourself. You teach to students. You deal with executives. What is leadership? The very basic question that we always start to all of our guests. What is it in your view?
So, from my experience, I would limit leadership just to one word, and that is sacrifice. If you look at all leaders, living, those who have passed away, the main identity lies in their ability to sacrifice. I'm not saying they have to lay down their own lives. They need to sacrifice something which is generally considered very attached or very precious to any normal human. And that's what makes you a leader, that you're willing to do that sacrifice. And behind the sacrifice, it has to be supported with a strategy. And if you say the word strategy, because I've been teaching it now since more than 15 years, I would say it's clarity. So instead of, just to make it more easy for our viewers and listeners to understand, it's how clear your vision is. And that's the reason why all these companies nowadays spend so much time, designing their vision, their mission, because that's where it actually begins. Many people don't realize this. So it works in a three-step process. You have to have a very clear vision, which brings about clarity. That's your strategy part. And to ensure that works, you need to have leadership. Now, leadership has many styles, but its core essence would be sacrifice. So that's how I would look at it.
So, in when you say sacrifice, is it the sacrificing your time, or what exactly is that element of sacrifice that a leader is supposed to do?
So there are many instances. Time would just be one of them. You see, time is the only thing we can't get back. We can get back money, we can get back our honor, we can get back our respect. We can get everything literally back, but we cannot get time back. So time is, of course, one of the main elements that you have to spend so much time understanding your audience, empathizing with them, taking tough decisions, because generally it comes down to that. And people get generally caught in this trap of taking very tough decisions and they become arrogant out of it. So they don't want to step back and say, okay, I learned something today. Perhaps I need to reflect. Perhaps I need to change my stance, or perhaps I need to adapt. So we are seeing a little, not a little, we see a major gap today. So if you see today, world leaders, uh, apart from politics, generally you fall into that vicious cycle where you're just making, rude statements, thinking that you're sounding very cool, of course, for that moment of time, but we are not really seeing anyone leading. We're seeing mass influence. We're seeing lots of amplification. We're seeing huge followers digitally, for people. But that still doesn't talk about leadership. Hopefully, today in our podcast, we'll explore, why leadership is so important, and where somewhere it has there's been a big disconnect. And I think the movement which you started, Shehzad, with Ronald, is one of the perfect ingredients, to resolve this problem.
Hmm. So on this element of sacrifice, are you saying that the ability or the intention for somebody to unlearn, is that some kind of a sacrifice? Like you have to let go your ego or let
Let
go
me give you an
your,
example.
yeah.
So, generally, if you were to meet, let's say, a political leader, you meet a corporate leader, they have reached a stage in life where they don't need extra advice, where they sometimes think they know it all. So, over here, the sacrifice element would be sacrificing their ego. They need to step down. They need to understand things, go back to the grassroots. That's where you see lots of organizations flourish. That's where you see countries flourish, when the leaders, irrespective of their gender or ideology, are willing to make this sacrifice. So sacrifice, and it doesn't mean anything like gruesome, or we're not talking anything about like in terms of bodily harm. But what I'm trying to say is there is something that you have to let go. You
Hmm.
can't be attached, and in fact you see that many leaders end up doing a lot of micromanagement,
Right.
which again then leads to narcissism, etc. So they need to let go in some areas, and this is not easy. Once you have tasted power anywhere in the world throughout history, we have seen that it has the ability to corrupt you. And what you would call a purification process is extremely difficult, in terms of sacrificing time, sacrificing your ego. Suddenly you're listening to people which you have overlooked. So
Hmm.
I believe the whole idea of dialogue, we're missing dialogue today. Unfortunately, on media channels, on TV channels, on social media, there's no dialogue, there's a debate. It's about us versus them. I am better than you know, and you're just stuck. This is like an endless loop, because until someone says, okay, let's agree to disagree, this will go on, and then the trolling begins, etc. So that's the reason why I said leadership, one of its main crucial elements is sacrifice.
This is something very new. This is something that your perspective is very new. That the concept of sacrifice, when you're talking about leadership, the more you explain, I'm getting it. But it really puts a very different spin to the
Yes.
how an ideal leadership attribute should be, and it involves unlearning, letting go of your ego. So all of these elements
Yes.
will come into play. Do you have anybody in your mind you have followed closely? And that example could be from anywhere, your family, friends, company, countries, where you think you have really seen this element of sacrifice in great motion.
I have seen, or rather, I've read a lot about sacrifice. I've visited some of the places where uh, these people have left a legacy behind in terms of leadership. You know, it's very difficult to answer this question, because there are numerous leaders in different industries and different walks of life. Each one has fantastic ways of showcasing leadership. They have different styles of it, right from, let's say, a politician, right, anywhere in the world. We could just choose one, right? We could choose one
Mm.
from UK itself, all right, or we could go right across the USA and see how Donald Trump is managing things, right? And then you have leaders in business. So, for
Yeah.
example, you have a Jeff Bezos, you have Elon Musk, right? These are big names, and they generally tend to do a lot of hands-on work. You know,
Right.
generally, okay? Now, they've all reached their own positions, so they have lots of people working for them day and night. But apart from these people, like I said, I read about a lot of people. Most of the leaders that I draw inspiration from have passed away. But if you read about them, and there are many different perspectives, that's what makes history interesting. There's no one perspective, no universal perspective. There are plenty of perspectives across the spectrum. So there could be some good points. Some people may consider not so good points, but overall, the holistic way we look at it, it showcases lots of different leadership opportunities. It shows us how, again, I'll use the word sacrifice, how much sacrifice a person has done in order to achieve a certain position and to lead the people, you know, whether it's a business, whether it's an army, whether it's a country, whether it's some kind of a movement. So if I were to look at it, I mean, just out of my memory, I could I could list down at least six people who have passed away, and one is, of course, living. You might find the last person very interesting. I'll come to that a little later. So I've got around seven people who have personally inspired me and have changed my perspective in lots of ways, uh, not only towards leadership, but towards living a more content life, a more meaningful life, right? If you were to start in a historical order,
Yeah.
okay, um, I think the first person would be Cyrus the Great. Okay,
Mm.
and generally when you hear, there are lots of titles like the Great, after many different leaders. Um, Usually people would say, but what about Alexander? Like Alexander's more famous. Yeah, he's more cool, in terms of the romances. But I personally think Cyrus, why he is so amazing when you read about him, and there are again many different historians who have different perspectives about him, is number one, he he was cut off from his central identity.
Right.
King Astyages, of Media, sent him away. Of course, this is a very long story. I don't want to get into it. And when he returned, he was still in his teens when he returned. That's when he understood a lot of things because he had lived the common life. He had
Mm.
seen, the problems around him. And if you look in history, he was one of the first leaders who gave the opportunity to the army to voice their opinion. So there was this little battle, not a little, but quite a big battle, and the first king who kind of made the mint, the coin, King Croesus. Whenever you study about money or economics, King Croesus will definitely pop in somewhere. He was the guy who amassed huge amounts of gold, and he created this IOU system. So Cyrus, gave him many chances that stop doing this. We're gonna invade. We're gonna There's a place called Lydia. He said we're gonna come there, and you've got to stop what you're doing. And eventually, when that happened, he thought he's going to be killed. King Croesus thought he's going to be killed, but Cyrus gave him a very different opinion. He said, "I have more money than you," and King Croesus was like, "That's impossible." And what he did was he called all his army members, and he said, "I have distributed my wealth amongst all my people. And when I want my wealth, I just have to ask them." So he told all his soldiers, "Tell me how much are you willing to give back?" So when they collected the number on paper or whatever they had back then, it was way more than what King Croesus could have thought. And King Croesus was obviously, he was looting people under the name of debt and etc. So that was the first economic reform I saw him doing. The second was military reform. And the third kind of reform was, of course, he went around to many different, what we call countries today. He went to many different areas, and he liberated the people. Right. So you might have read about, him liberating the Jews of Babylon. A lot of different things have taken place. So
Right.
according to me, Cyrus the Great has great status. Okay, really. because of two things. He brought about liberty, okay?
Mm.
He brought freedom, and he brought economic, or what you can call perhaps monetary freedom in a big way. So this was the first monetary reform which was created, and it made people happy.
Yeah.
And obviously then there are different things about how he died, etc. I don't want to get into that, but for nearly 2 centuries, that's around 200 years,
Mm.
through his son, etc., his legacy remained. And then of course, there were different things which happened, but that's the power. So even if you go to Pasargade today, which is
Mm.
today modern day Iran, um, that place is sacrosanct. They
Yeah.
still, even people who don't agree with the way currently Iran is being ruled, they still agree with those principles. And of course, the Iranians also, the current Iranians, they have a lot of respect, immense respect for Cyrus, right? So that's the first person I could think of in terms of leadership, okay? Because he set an example that
Yeah.
things have to be done differently. He broke the mold. So the moment you do that, you're
Yeah.
showcasing leadership, and if you can sustain it. Generally, what happens? Someone breaks the mold, and they get lost in the process. They're overthrown, or whatever. They get assassinated, etc. But so Cyrus was the first example I could think of. The second one, if I were to think, not necessarily in a timeline frame, the second one would be uh, Gandhi, okay, Mahatma Gandhi, where the guy has suffered a lot. Okay, South Africa, he's a brown man over there, a lot of racism. Goes to UK, he goes to England to study, he becomes a
Yeah.
barrister, and he faces lots of trials, tribulations, and slowly, not immediately, but slowly, he realizes that he needs to do something.
Yeah.
And yeah, immense sacrifice. He uses the British ideology against them, and he mobilizes forces. He uses something called ahimsa,
Yeah.
non-violence, which nobody had thought of before. Again, breaking the mold, right? This came at the cost of his own, his own family life and personal life. That's a lot to debate on for Gandhi. And eventually, he just lived 1 year after India got independence. He was
Yeah.
assassinated, of course, for his views on bringing two different ideologies together, etc. But that was the second example I could think of. The third example, so the first one, Cyrus, would be economic leadership, military leadership.
Yeah.
The second one, which I mentioned, Gandhi, was about a nation. He brought a nation together, right? Which is amazing. All the things he has done. The third example which I could think of is Prophet Muhammad,
Mm.
and I'll be very short on this one. I'll only stick to one area. I was having a discussion with someone the other day. I have a lot of students, and we have very open dialogue on general matters. So someone mentioned that your Prophet Muhammad brought Sharia, right? And today's Sharia, it's kind of demonized, in the
Yeah.
Western media especially. So I had to take out a couple of minutes to quickly put it in a nutshell and give it to him. I said, it's a very big topic. I can't discuss divine law and actual law which we would practice here. But what I would tell you in a nutshell, this is what he brought about. So the first thing was, you see, in those days, female infanticide was very big. The moment they
Yeah.
knew there was a girl who was born, they would kill. So he stopped that. Second, he started the process of stopping slavery. Okay,
Mm.
would take centuries, right? If you look at America, it's just only maybe 100 years ago they stopped it, but um, he started the process. Okay,
Yeah.
it's not easy to give up these things. Okay, since once you're used to this, and Sharia. Okay, if anyone were to ask you, you can even. I hope the listeners are taking notes. It's very simple actually. It's I put it as an acronym. I call it PHILR. Okay, filler.
Right.
And all I say is, before this acronym, I put the word protection. So Sharia is basically the protection of P, which stands for property. So if you
Yeah.
have any disputes regarding property, anything related to it, there is a law for it. The
Yeah.
second one, H, which stands for honor.
Yeah.
Every human has dignity. Every human deserves dignity. And there are
Yeah.
different laws to protect that honor, especially, for females, even in the case of males, in case of children, etc. So the protection of honor, those laws came in. The third one is I. I stands for intellect.
Right.
Protection of intellect. So today we will see trademarks, copyrights, patents. These are all examples of protection of
Correct.
the intellect,
Intellectual
right?
property. Yeah.
So it started way back then, and then L. So PHIL. L stands for life. You
Yeah.
you have to protect life. In fact, many people are not aware, but whenever there was a battle, okay, there was a very strict command by the Prophet that no tree has to be harmed. So you
Right.
can imagine there were lots of ethics, laid down before fighting. Anyway, so that's protection of life, and the whole concept of blood money. If somebody were to die in an accident, etc., how do you recompensate that with blood money? Anyway, that all comes under L. So we've done PHIL, and the last one is R. R stands for religion. Unfortunately, there are this has happened since the 1980s, I think. The media at large has demonized or has twisted the R part. Religion means no one can impose their thoughts on you, and there
Yeah.
are certain ways to protect the religion. Again, protection of religion. So this is where the word jihad comes in. Jihad means struggle. So if I'm
Yeah.
a smoker and I want to stop smoking, I'm doing that with myself. But
Correct.
this is twisted and it's made into holy war, which
Yeah.
is not wrong, but it's totally blown out of context. It means
Yeah.
if I'm living in a Muslim country and the government calls on me, okay, let's pick up arms, we have to defend ourselves, that is when this takes place.
Yeah.
Not when you go and oppress someone or you're terrorizing someone. That's wrong. So anyway, so I just thought, and this made a lot of sense to the student. He said, "Okay, I never knew this. I always thought Sharia law meant, wearing the hijab and you're, going to, flog someone for doing something." And I gave him one example just to quickly wrap up this topic. I don't want to sound very preachy over here. I said, "Look, it depends on the interpretation. So how you interpret the law matters." So there's one school of thought. I just gave an example. I said for theft, the
Yeah.
idea is to set an example to others to cut off your hand.
Yeah.
Now, there's one school of thought which cuts you right from the arm, your
Right.
entire arm's gone. And there's one school of thought which says, no, we'll only cut off the fingers, because
Right.
how will you work? How will you pray? How will you do your day to day activities? The
Yeah.
idea is to set an example that nobody does it. Today, also, if you have been to Saudi Arabia or if you go to any of these Middle Eastern countries, not all of them, some of
Yeah.
them, especially in Saudi Arabia, I've noticed this, I've witnessed this myself in the holy cities of Makkah and Medina.
Yeah.
People just leave their wares, their items on the road, in the shops, open. There's no fear of theft,
Yeah.
because there's such a fear that, I'm going to get caught and that's it, half my life is over, because of this punishment. um,
Yeah.
that works. Of course, this is debatable, in our modern context, in our democracies, etc. But I just thought I'll share this. So I would attribute spiritual reform, okay, as
Yeah.
a leader, and in terms of justice, okay, great way a big reform took place under Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.
Mm.
And the next leader, so we did Cyrus, we did Gandhi,
Gandhi. Hmm.
did Prophet Muhammad, and after that, I was just thinking now, there's so many different leaders in the Middle East who have historically done so many things. This year, early this year, I don't know if I mentioned this to you, Shehzaad, earlier, that I visited Iraq.
Yeah.
Okay, and there are two main areas. There are three. One is, of course, Babylon, which is now more or less Baghdad. I didn't spend too much time there, but I went to two cities, two other holy cities, which is called Karbala and Najaf. So the
Yeah.
next leader I want to talk about is actually Prophet Muhammad's son-in-law and his cousin. Uh, his name is Ali ibn Abi Talib. Now, over here, I just want to point out, I'm not going through his life or anything like that. There is a book which has been compiled by a person called Sayyid Razi, and this book is called Nahjul Balagha, meaning the peak of eloquence.
Right.
So, if you want to understand leadership, if you want to understand military leadership, if you want to understand governance, all you have to do is pick up this book and go to the letters. This book is a compilation of Ali's letters, okay, to his generals. So when he became the Khalifa, the Caliph, he was the fourth Caliph. When when he was made the fourth Caliph, he sent his governor to Egypt, and he wrote a letter to him. His governor's name was Malik al-Ashtar. This letter has been referenced in the United Nations multiple times. Anyone can Google it right now or read it. It's called the Letter to Malik al-Ashtar, Imam Ali's Letter to Malik al-Ashtar. That's the title that's given to him, and it's amazing. If modern countries were to follow that, your law enforcement, your budgeting, everything would be, I mean, more or less corruption free. So in terms of a voice of human justice, that name popped up right now in my mind. So I thought I should share this with you. So that's the fourth leader. An immense amount of sacrifices he, his son, everyone has given towards the religion. So that's the fourth one. Okay, one example I could share just to show you justice, because someone might say, okay, what's the justice in terms of leadership? So in fact, he was made caliph during the civil wars. Okay, so there were lots of civil wars going on within Islam. Okay, at that point of time, which has led to so many sectarian, issues. So his brother, his own brother, once came to him, for money, because he was running the treasury. He was obviously in charge of the treasury. So his brother came to him and said, "I need some money. I want to talk to you." So he called him in his chamber, and there was a candle on the side. So his brother said, "I need some money from you. You run the treasury. I want to borrow something." So he immediately extinguished the candle. He said, "What's going on? Why do you extinguish the candle?" He took out another candle and he lit it. He said, "Oh, that candle belonged to the treasury. This candle is mine. Now let's talk. What do you need? How can I help you?" His brother realized and just walked away. He knew that this man is not going to give him anything from the treasuries. So I'm just giving an example that leadership, when I read this example, I used to work in companies, back then. I think this was just before I moved to London. I was working in Dubai. And there was this habit where you pick up certain notepads, free stationery from the company, maybe some free coffee, who cares? Everyone's doing it, right? Everyone's taking these things. It's not stealing. It's just you're part of the company, so why not? But after I read this incident, I suddenly realized what I'm doing is wrong, and I think I need to stop, right? So that's one great thing, and there's so much of Islamophobia today. And whenever I just think of this one situation where his name was abused a lot. Ali ibn Abi Talib's name was abused a lot during those civil wars. So there was one person who came and said, "What's wrong with you? How can you not fight back when people abuse you?" So he just said, "I'm like a date tree, and when someone throws a stone at me, I'll just give dates back." And today, when you think about it, I'm like, there's so much trolling. The first reaction is, I'm going to give back. I'm going to teach this guy a lesson. I'm going to teach that troller a lesson.
Yeah.
And I just reflect on this, and I'm like, man, I have a choice now. So do I want to be a little bit like that man, or maybe I just want to do my own thing? So this year, when I went to Iraq, I went to his tomb, and I was just standing there right in front of his grave, and I was just thinking to myself, if I can you just be 1% of what this man has been, so it's amazing. There's so many people from different religions coming there. There's no, yeah, unlike Makkah and Medina, there's no restriction. You can come as long as you're obeying the rules of normal, decent clothes. So we had a lot of different people. I saw a couple of Hindus. I saw a couple of Christians over
Right.
there, and very interesting because everyone's talking about the leadership qualities of this person. Anyway, so that's the fourth one. So we've done Cyrus, we've done Gandhi, right? And I told you each one brought a different type
Yeah.
of movement with. I'm just trying to show eclectic leadership in the best way possible. The third one was Prophet Muhammad. The fourth one was Ali ibn Abi Talib. The fifth one is an interesting one. Nelson Mandela.
Yeah.
Again, sacrifice. This guy spent 27 years in prison. 27. And when he came out, he had the whole everything at his disposal to take revenge. Just imagine 27 years you have been plotting, perhaps, waiting, perhaps. I don't know. I mean, I can't even imagine. And he had all the right to do that. He didn't do it. And he just pushed for reform. He pushed that equal rights have to be there. and he's an icon. So today, if you were to step into a Madame Tussauds, 2 years back we went to Singapore. So there's a Madame Tussauds over there. They've got many branches now, apart from the one in London. So the first world leader, when you go to the world leader section, the first leader is Nelson Mandela. And I've seen this in London, I've seen this in New York, I have seen this now in Singapore. And it just amazed me that this is the guy they called a terrorist. Imagine, they called him a terrorist for I don't know how many, maybe 15 years or so, maybe more. And he was labeled in all newspapers and government documents. This man is a terrorist. And he comes and he brings a movement without any bloodshed, etc. I think that's immense sacrifice. And if you look at his words, even his grandson today is following the same path of his.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think that's a very good leadership example, and he won the Nobel Prize, I think in '93, if I'm not mistaken. So great characteristics of leadership, right? Now, apart from Nelson Mandela, because I've given many historic leaders, uh, let's talk about business. So generally, when I ask my students, which are the leaders, in India they would say someone like Ambani, okay, billionaire, or they would say someone like Jeff Bezos, or someone would say Elon Musk, and then after the class is over, they ask me, so what about your favorite business leader? And I tell them something, they just stare at me. They're like, who? The name, this person is from Japan. Uh, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. It's Akio Morita, the founder or the co-founder of Sony, right?
Right.
Now, Shehzaad, I don't know if you remember when we were studying strategic management, just 20 years ago. So
Yeah.
I'm not really, yeah. We had this live case study on Sony, right? And that's when I never knew much about Sony. I just knew it's a great, very expensive electronics brand. Um, I did a lot of digging after we completed the course. And the more I read about this guy, um, I was amazed. Okay. So this guy, just after, imagine your country has been bombed, okay, for no reason whatsoever. And then, in the sense, I mean, I'm not talking about Pearl Harbor, the island, the places of Hiroshima, Nagasaki. It made no sense to anyone, but anyway, it happened, right, in a show of power. So, so these guys had to figure out how to show the world we're still okay, and they went into overdrive mode. Now, this guy, Akio Morita, if you read about the personal sacrifices this guy has made in terms of achieving the main, I think the highlight of Sony would be the Walkman, okay, back in those
Yeah.
days. To do that, like he drove his staff crazy, and in a good way. He was one of those few business leaders who brought about a family approach. Generally it's a transactional approach. You punch in, punch out, that's it. Here there was more of a family approach. If you've read some of his books, or there's some documentaries on him. Last year I visited Japan,
Mhm.
and there was this Toyota museum. Of course, that's another story. Maybe in some other podcast or some other discussion, we'll talk about that. So that's a wonderful story of inspiration. But when you actually study about Sony, I didn't even know. I always pronounced it as Sony. It's actually Sony because there was this
Right.
song called Sonny Boy, which was very popular in the US, and they wanted to catch that ride because the
Right.
idea of the company was sonus. Sonus is a scientific term. I'm not a
Right.
science student, so yeah. So sonus is something to do with the sound, I believe. So they
Yeah.
wanted to showcase that, but it wasn't attractive enough. So they heard
Right.
of this song called Sonny Boy, Sonny Boy. I don't know how it goes, but whatever I remember of it, it's something like that. And it was running in America, back in those days. And that's where they said, okay, let's call this a Sony. And when I actually played some of their old ads, at the end they would say it's a Sony. They would not say it's a Sony. So as an Indian, the pronunciation changes a lot. And I would generally call it Sony, or even over here people would say Sony, right? Or there's a Sony channel, or a Sony TV, or a Sony PlayStation. But it's actually called Sony. So I didn't know that. And as I said, reading about Akio Morita, how he ensured that the design is the ultimate design. Nothing can beat it. It's amazing. Now, how I can say this? Until I had read his story, I would have said Steve Jobs is one of the best marketing leaders out there. But everything changed after I read that Steve Jobs himself said, everything I wanted to achieve, this guy has already done it. So that says everything, right? I mean, if Steve Jobs considers him inspirational, I mean, I think that's the epitome of leadership in business, right? As I said, there are many other great leaders in business.
Of
I'm not
course.
trying to say that there's no one else like him. This is just one small example, but I think it's not spoken about much. I hope this podcast more people read about him and perhaps discuss him in corporate areas and classes, etc. So much to learn. All right, and
Yeah.
one of the things I'll again mention is he brought in a different value system of family approach, which is very rare in the Japanese work style, which they follow. They're very hard workers, right? So
Mm.
that was the thing. And the last one, okay, and I've eaten a lot of time into this, but it's really worth it. Uh, the last one is going to surprise a lot. It's going to surprise you also, Shehzaad. So I was just thinking, okay, I've got all guys, I've got all men, not trying to sound anything in a different way, but I think I'm being a little impartial. There have been lots of women leaders in
Of course.
history, even currently in the business scenario. So I was thinking, and I've been doing this since a long time, since 2, 3 months now. I had conducted a leadership course for a corporate a couple of months back, and that's when this question came to. So when you ask me this right now, like which leaders inspire you, there's something which took place recently. Okay,
Yeah.
everyone's read it in the news globally. So there's this young woman. I wouldn't have taken her so seriously. I think the whole world had kind of stereotyped her that okay, she just goes on a rant, and she's a great climate activist, and she has a different way of doing things and saying things at a very young age. But this time, she was on one of the flotillas to Gaza. Okay, and Greta Thunberg. I would have never even thought about it, but it made so much sense last month when she was released. She was arrested, right?
Yeah.
When she was released, she had an opportunity to go and say, oh, they did this to me, they tortured me, she didn't say any of that. She said the bigger story is what's happening over there, it's not me. And I think this is big because who doesn't want that FaceTime? Who doesn't want that attention? Just imagine if I put all the cameras on you, right, and you've just suffered horrible torture or ordeals, you would want to share some of it, right? You would want to be acknowledged. She didn't do
Yeah.
that. Now
Yeah.
somebody would say, "Oh, that's because she has Asperger's syndrome, or she has this, or that." I think that's sacrifice. So that's what the central theme of what I was saying. I think she sacrificed her personal ordeal over something much bigger, and I think she has all the characteristics of being a great leader in the future. So I can't say it's still yeah, still a work in progress, but she fits you know all the checks that you would have for having a leader. She's broken the mold. She's done something differently. She has her own movement. I think it's called Future for Fridays or something like that. I'm not sure. Uh, I think personally, she can really make a lot of positive changes in the world. Uh,
Mm.
I don't know so much about business, whether she would be doing that because she's against many businesses because of the pollution aspect,
Yeah.
etc. But I think we should give credibility, or we should give credit where it is due. So I can easily say a lot of other businesswomen or political leaders who are
Yeah.
women. Uh, but I choose to say Greta Thunberg because I think she is showcasing eclectic leadership at a very young age, and I think at some point, she needs the support. I don't know
Yeah.
how, but yeah. So I think these are the seven individuals I think would help shape anyone's life. Of course, I'm saying this from my perspective. I brought in
Yeah.
a couple of Islamic leaders, etc. But yeah, I mean, there's so much to learn. Now, if I move across the world and if I go to South America, there are so many leaders over there.
True.
Unfortunately, living in India and studying more or less through an Indian system, we haven't been exposed to
Yeah.
much of South American leaders. Maybe some names like Che Guevara or Evan Perez. These names would maybe pop up here and there, but there's so much to learn. If I go towards China, China
Yeah.
has so much. Again, but it's not spoken about for various geopolitical reasons. So generally,
Yeah.
it's always Europe, uh,
Yeah.
perhaps USA, and of course India. Where we were occupied so many
Yeah.
years, nearly a century. But anyway, so I think this is very interesting. If some people want to read about the historical leaders I mentioned, especially Cyrus, there's this great, historian. I'm sure you've
Yeah.
heard of him, William Dalrymple. He's based in India now, and he runs another podcast called Empire. And when he spoke about the entire history of Cyrus, I mean, I don't have to agree with everything that a person would say, but I think it's really interesting to hear firsthand
Sure.
uh, from a very legit historian about Pasargadae and about Cyrus, the Achaemenid Empire. It's wonderful, and there's so many lessons to be learned. I mean, it's one podcast is not enough,
It
right?
is.
So yeah.
I mean, you said it. I was thinking what I have to do in my next flight ever soon, hopefully back to India. I'll have to attend one of your classes because, as you said, there is so many things that you mentioned. The seven examples. We could have actually sessions on each of them, one by
Yes.
one, one by one. And first thing that I wanted to definitely confirm to the viewers is that we'll have subsequent episodes because this one episode is we're just scratching the
Sure.
surface here, and you really laid
Absolutely.
out some brilliant examples in front of us. So I could take off a few summaries from that. That the example that you've mentioned of all of these personalities, they not only come from different timelines, but they also come from different walks of life, different professions, and their contribution towards overall humanity was through different routes. One was through the justice reform,
Yes.
financial reform, spiritual reform, human rights, many, many. So it's not limited. So that's one thing that we
Yes.
have to understand. The overarching theme of today's episode was the concept of sacrifice, which is you clarified it that it doesn't have to be something physical or
No,
something
not at all.
related with your finance. It can be, but it's not supposed to be. It
Yes.
could be your time, it could be the way you unlearn. And overall, what I have understood with your examples that you provided, even in the end with Greta, I think fighting for your right or the right of your people to have the choice.
Yes.
That is the first level of sacrifice that you have to invest in, that we want to have the choice ourselves. So that's number one.
Yes.
But the second one is extremely crucial or more important, whether or not you're making the right choice then or not. That is what kind of signifies the whole thing that, as you said, like I didn't have a choice. I sacrificed a lot. I rebelled against something. I struggled and I became a leader. Now we have the choice. But after you have that choice, do you waste it? Do you make the wrong choices? Do you do exactly the way who you opposed once upon a time and you start behaving like them? So you kind of completely wasted that opportunity to make the right choice. So it's all about making that choice and the sacrifices that you make to have that power to make the choice and making the right choice in the end, which is
Yeah.
good for the people that you are fighting for, not necessarily for yourself. That is the sacrifice, I would say, right? Is that what you would agree with
That
that?
is absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. Letting go of something or something you've developed or a habit which you have taken for granted. When
Yeah,
you let go, it's a hard decision. It's very hard. Okay.
yeah,
But I think that's where you see the sparks of leadership,
yeah.
coming up.
And also, you mentioned in the various dialogues in the political landscape or otherwise in our lives in companies, is this going to be a dialogue or a debate? Are we just
Yes.
debating it for debate's sake, or we should have a dialogue so that I allow you to speak, I hear you, you allow me to speak, but to the end, we want to arrive at a decision, a consensus. Otherwise,
Yes.
you move into that cycle. So it's all about those fine little choices. And coming
Yes.
back to what you said, where do I let go? Where do I let go in order to have something bigger and greater for all of us? This is the kind of sacrifice that you are referring to as a core attribute of leadership. So this is,
Absolutely.
I must say, we have only scratched, I think, 5 to 10% of the tremendous wisdom and a very unique perspective that you have brought in, because you mentioned about examples from historic leaders like Gandhi, who are just around, not that far in history, recent ones, and even to greet us. So the whole gamut, there are so many commonalities between all of them, but they were very different in terms of their context, in terms of what they wanted to offer. So we will be completing today's episode here pretty much, and I would ask you to just share any final thoughts on whatever we have discussed. But the guarantee to the viewers is that we have to have subsequent episodes so that we can flesh out these ideas further. Any
Yes.
last comment that you would want to make for us before we?
So if someone was listening to this right now or viewing this podcast, what's my takeaway? I mean, you've summarized it already, Shehzad, but in order for this to work, there has to be a formula. There has to be some kind of, you know, addition, a roadmap. So
Yeah.
I just would say three things. First would be policy. Okay,
Hmm.
you need to have a very well thought policy. For that policy to work, the second thing would be a process. You need a good process implementation. And the third, which I think where both the previous points fail, is culture.
Yeah.
If you don't have the right culture, you may have the best policies in the world, you may have the best process in the world, but it would just fail because the culture is not willing to adapt or embrace this. We can always discuss this in another podcast, but that's, I think, after discussing all these leadership uh, personalities, I think this is the best way to summarize it, that for all of their traits and characteristics or legacies to survive, or leadership styles to survive, these 3 points are important. And if you look at the overall eclectic leadership movement that Ronald has begun, um, we've covered all of them. And for all of this, for politics, for psychology, for linguistics to work, you need these 3 points. And generally, it always comes down to culture, where we see the culture just cannot accept. And if they do accept it, they become something like Singapore, right? The culture is
Yeah.
completely different, right? But everyone can't be a Singaporean, right? For
Yeah.
various reasons, of course. So that's the point I was driving through.
Fantastic. Thank you very much once again, Dr. Quresh. And
Thank you,
this
Shehzad.
episode, it has to be
Yeah,
continued further. And I really encourage our viewers to subscribe to our channel, to join the movement, and of course, leave any comments or questions that they have for Dr. Quresh, and we will make sure to get back to you promptly. On that note, and in the aspiration for a subsequent episode very soon, Dr. Quresh, thank you very much once again, and have a good day.
thank you, Shehzad. Bye bye.